Welcome back to the What Would Dorsey Do podcast. I'm Dorcy Pruter, your host, and today we're going to dive into topics that sit right at the intersection of faith, politics, and deep soul healing. And I want to talk to you about what it means to have radical faith. And not the kind of radical that really gets tossed around in the media as a buzzword, but the kind that actually strips away any comfort, illusion, and the need to fit into anyone else's box. And I'm going to be pulling from the book, David Platt's book, Radical, and from the cultural icon, Charlie Kirk. And I'm going to share why I founded the Church of Soul Illumination, a sacred mushroom church, because the communion with God is your birthright. And it's not something that you need to outsource as an institution or ideology. So stick with me for this podcast because this is going to be raw, real, and hopefully freeing. And my beliefs about organized religion have always been clear. No single religion owns the relationship any one soul has with God. And the divine cannot be contained within the walls of an institution or defined by any dogma. Ironically, that belief is part of what made me resist starting a church in the first place. And I didn't want to replicate the very systems that are so often stripping people of their sovereignty. And it took deep courage to push past my fears and limiting beliefs to realize that the Church of Soul Illumination, which is a sacred mushroom church, should or really could be a container for liberation instead of control. And standing against polarized beliefs, whether in faith or religion, or even in polarized world that I actually live in with my business, Conscious Co-Parenting Institute. All of those things place me right in the middle of the vortex. And yet that's really where I was called to stand. And I still laugh when I think about the attacks I faced early on in my career. People made fun of me for the slogan that was on my business card, from divided to united, we are all one. And one of the predominant voices in the parental alienation space mocked me and even told a mentor, Randy Rand, that he was really ridiculing me for having that on my business card. And at the time, on the back of my business card, I also had um, icons icons of other businesses and other things that I was doing. And that ridicule really hit me so hard that I eventually removed the tagline from my card. And I carried shame for believing that I had done something wrong, as if I had to shrink my truth to fit into someone else's narrative. And that's what living in unworthiness looks like. That's what subscribing to someone else's belief system does to you in order to be accepted. And as a leader for more than 20 years in my journey in the parenting space, my journey really began with a simple business card. And again, it said Dorcy Pruter, CEO and founder of the Conscious Co-Parenting Institute, from divided to united, we are all one. And I started that business with a big, hairy, audacious goal to end parental alienation, to obliterate it from the family system, from the human consciousness. And that vision has guided my work ever since. And along the way, I've been mocked, ridiculed by some of the loudest voices in the parental alienation movement on both sides. And I've been qualified to testify as an expert in reunification solutions for parents and children suffering from emotional cutoffs caused by child psychological abuse. And at every turn and every time I enter the courtroom, it's the same old tactics. Isn't it true you're only a high school graduate? Isn't it true you run a reunification camp? And countless other personal attacks on my character and my business. And even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, my faith was on trial too. And in that last trial where I was testifying as a reunification expert, I was testifying in this court, and the opposing counsel fixated not on my results, but on my spiritual beliefs and my affiliation to the Church of Soul Illumination, trying to paint me as untrustworthy. She ignored 2 decades of successfully reuniting families, choosing instead to attack my background, my character, the fact that I didn't go to college. And of course, like I said, this wasn't the first time. Years ago, a client who owed me a lot of money turned around and sued me instead of paying me. And her lawyer also twisted and distorted my personal conversations that I had with this client about her native ancestry, weaponizing it to paint me as weird or unfit or untrustworthy and as a fraud or a charlatan. And these kinds of attacks have followed me for years. And I've learned that they're really not about me. They're about the fear of what I represent. I'm a woman standing sovereign, refusing to outsource my faith and my beliefs, and building pathways that heal families and souls. And you might not believe this about me. And it makes a lot of people around me crazy because I don't hold hate in my heart. People have said and done things, some of the most horrific things they've said about me and about my business, and yet I don't give it any energy. In my morning meditations, I hold love for each and every one of them. I visualize their hearts filling with light. I hold compassion and I hold unconditional love for each one of them, visualizing them, holding them, visualizing their heart filled with light and drowning out the darkness that led them to do and say the things that they've done. And then I do the same thing for myself because I'm also not a perfect person either. I process out loud. And for those close to me, they've heard me say things when I'm emptying my container. But then I move on. I move to the place of unconditional love. And my husband frequently reminds me of things that people have said and done to me when I've reached out to them or they've reached out to me. And my response is always the same. Oh, right. I forgot about that. And it frustrates him, my assistant too. It frustrates people who love me. But I remind them that they don't need to defend me. And while I appreciate their love, it isn't necessary for them to defend me. I've moved on and I don't hold hate in my heart. And even in the co parenting space where someone has stolen clients and money, attacked my reputation with false allegations that could have destroyed many people and even me, but I don't hate that person. I hold compassion for someone who feels that in order to be worthy, that person must tear someone else down, someone that called that person a friend, someone who trusted them. And hatred costs too much energy. And faith is finding compassion and love. And it does not mean I let them back into my life to do it again. Faith doesn't say become a doormat. Faith says, I love you no matter what. And I also love myself. So standing in sovereignty means standing for truth despite the chaos and disorder around me. These moments happen not to me, but for me. So I can see my own shadow and my old beliefs and the places that I've struggled with my own worthiness, my unconditional love, compassion, and faith. And there are many people in my innermost circle, the few as they may be, and these people are there because I love them and they love me and they're trusted advisors. There aren't a lot of them, and it's not because I hate or reject other people, but because I have a mission and a purpose, and I stand at the center in the vortex, which means illuminating darkness in all directions in other people that they may not be willing or ready to see. And their projection requires me to anchor in self love, in compassion, and sovereignty, to lead by example and to walk my talk. And that's not going to make everyone happy. I'm not going to agree with everything everyone says or does or feels. And the truth is, in America, a lot of people have confused faith with comfort. And we've been told faith means showing up on Sundays, singing songs, maybe tithing, and then going back to chasing the American dream. And that's exactly what David Platt was calling out in his book, Radical, which he published in 2010. He said faith was never meant to be convenient. True discipleship costs you something, and it asks you to surrender your comfort, your illusion of control, and even your safety. And here's the piece that gets missed quite a bit. You don't have to be a Christian to live that way. Radical faith is about surrendering to God, not checking the right boxes on a membership card. And I've met people who've never set foot in a church, but their devotion to truth and love and service, leading with a servant's heart, outshines their most devout pew sitters and people I know that go to church every Sunday and even Wednesdays and multiple times a week. And that's because God is not confined to a denomination. And radical faith is bigger than the brand name of your religion. So I started seeing how many people were drowning in religion, but starving in spirit and faith. And they knew the rituals, but they didn't feel alive, and a lot of hypocrisy. And they memorized scripture, but they didn't feel God. And that's the danger of outsourcing your faith. You end up with someone else's relationship with God and not your own. And Charlie Kirk, I want to shift to him for a minute. And however you feel about him, that's your personal feelings and your personal beliefs. Whether you love him or hate him, those are all your decisions. His message resonates with millions of people because he points to something real. People are desperate for certainty. They see cultural situations unraveling. They see families breaking down, values collapsing, identity under attack, and they want something solid to stand on. And Charlie's solution is to call people back to biblical values and tradition and a conservative Christian order. And I get it. Chaos is terrifying. And when the world feels like it's completely falling apart, it's natural to reach for certainty. But here's where I diverge. When faith becomes a political brand, it loses its power and it becomes about belonging to a tribe instead of belonging to God. And you can vote the right way or memorize the right verses and still feel empty inside. And what people are really craving isn't a return to the 1950s or a revival of nationalism. They're actually craving meaning, and people are craving presence and craving direct communion with the divine. And that's something that no politician, no preacher, no ideology can deliver. It's something that you can only experience yourself. And I want to be clear. Charlie Kirk had a deep devotion as a Christian, and that deserves respect because that is his belief system. And his devotion does not make him more godly than a Buddhist monk, a Sufi mystic, a person in sacred ceremony, a shaman. It doesn't make him any more godly than other beliefs. Someone who has no religion at all is no less godly than somebody that does. Faith does not work on a sliding scale of who's right and who's wrong. Even those who claim no faith, they still have a part in creation and are still breathing the breath of the divine and still carrying a purpose written into their soul. And this is why I founded the Church of Soul Illumination, because a sacred mushroom, they don't hand you someone else's belief. They strip away illusions so that you can experience God directly. So when I guide ceremony, people encounter the same kind of visions and revelations that you read about in the Bible, where Moses had his experience with the burning bush, or Paul was blinded by the light, or mystical encounters have always been a part of faith. They're even in the Bible. And the problem is, somewhere along the way, we got scared of that. We sanitized faith. We decided that visions were too messy or too unpredictable or too dangerous. People judged us for them. And faith has always been messy. It's not rebellion, it's a restoration, it's a returning to your sovereignty. One of the magical things about mushrooms is they return you to the raw, unfiltered presence of spirit. And they don't erase the Bible, they illuminate it. They don't discard traditions, they reveal the heartbeat beneath it. So when people come out of ceremony, they don't walk away with my doctrine or someone else's doctrine. They walk away knowing deep in the core of their being, felt all the way to their bones and in every cell of their body, that God is real, that God is love, and their life has meaning. And that is radical faith. And it doesn't require a label. It doesn't require a religion. People come to us at the Church of Soul Illumination from all walks of life, from all walks of politics, from extreme left to extreme right, to people in the middle and people with no religion and people with no politics. At the core of this conversation is the sovereign soul. This is the part of you that cannot be colonized by fear, by dogma, or by politics or religion. The sovereign soul is eternal. It is the spark of God inside of you. The faith is about reclaiming it. So, walking in faith takes courage. It means standing strong when others tell you you're wrong. It means trusting the whisper of the Spirit in your heart, even when it contradicts the roar of the crowd. Courageous faith is not about arrogance, it's about humility, saying yes to God, even when you don't know where that yes will lead you. That's the path of the sovereign soul. Daring to trust your direct connection with the divine more than the opinions of the world or other people. Why does this terrify institutions and governments? Because sovereignty removes the middleman. If you know God directly, you don't need to buy anyone else's program of salvation. You don't need to vote a certain way to belong. You don't need to check the boxes. You already are whole, already divine, already connected. Being a person of faith does not mean parroting religious rhetoric. It does not mean defending someone else's belief system louder than your own. It means being rooted in love, integrity, and devotion to the divine as you understand it. So that could be through your organized religion, through Christ, through ceremony, through prayer, or through silence under the stars outside. God is not grading us on our form. God is looking for authenticity. That is why I do the work that I do in ceremony. I've watched people weep as they've reconnected with God they thought had abandoned them. I've seen people release decades of shame from being told they were never enough. I've watched faith come alive in people who have had long given up religion or who've been devout to a religion and felt shame and fear around it. That's the sovereign soul reclaiming its place in the world. And at the heart of justice, order, and chaos lies one central truth: the family is the foundation of the nation. And when faith is misunderstood, and when people outsource their beliefs instead of embodying them, the family begins to fracture. And when families fracture, societies unravel. And the confusion of chasing someone else's belief system rather than cultivating one's own relationship with the divine is one of the fundamental forces destroying not just households, but entire cultures. Healing the world begins in the family. The Bible, for those of you that are religious, is filled with reminders that households are sacred units. And as for me and my house, we serve the divine. We rise as sovereign souls within the family, and the medicine that can end generational cycles of trauma is each individual's sovereignty. And when one person in the family chooses sovereignty, self love, self acceptance, and direct communion with the divine, it creates a ripple of healing that extends outward through bloodlines and communities. And this is the calling of our time: to heal ancestral trauma by reclaiming sovereignty within our own families, within our own soul, and to stand in faith that is alive and personal, not secondhand or outsourced. And when the sovereign soul rises in each individual, it strengthens our relationships, our marriages, our partnerships. It heals parent-child relationships, and it restores trust across generations. This is where the healing of a nation and a world begins: one family, one sovereign soul at a time. And at the center of it all is love. God, the divine, is love. God, the divine, is acceptance. God, the divine, is compassion. This disorder, the chaos, and even the darkness that we see in the world, these are not accidents. They are part of a creation, and it's calling us and bringing us back to the universal truth of love, the universal truth of the divine. Anything that promotes division, hate, or violence, or fear, that is not God, that is not love, those energies are the shadow, the distortion, and the part of creation crying out to be brought back into the light. And when we respond to hate with hate or fear with fear, nothing changes. The pendulum just swings from one extreme to the other, leaving us locked in cycles of division. And when we choose to answer hate with compassion, violence with peace, fear with faith, the pendulum slows. Healing begins, light enters, and the work of radical faith to embody God's love in the world that has forgotten what love looks like and feels like. The embodiment of love is you, the sovereign soul. So, how do we heal this polarized world? We stop getting caught up in someone else's beliefs about our relationship as individuals with God. Healing begins when you reclaim the truth that communion with the divine is your birthright. You don't need permission. You don't need anyone else's approval. You just need willingness. And for some, that doorway is scripture. For others, it could be ceremony. For many people, it's both. The form doesn't matter. The encounter does. Don't settle for secondhand spirituality. Don't trade your sovereignty for someone else's certainty. Step into radical truth that God is bigger than any one religion, bigger than politics, and bigger than fear. And remember that every life has its own soul contract. Every soul comes to this planet with lessons, purpose, and experiences that may not make any sense to any one of us. And it's not our job to judge other people's contracts. Some souls come here to struggle. Some come to teach, some come to break patterns and cycles, some to heal. All are sacred. All are in relationship with creation. The meaning of the soul's journey belongs to that soul and the divine, and it's not for us to judge. It's not our contract. Radical faith is not about being Christian. It's not about being conservative or not even about being counterculture or liberal. It's not about rejecting anyone's point of view. Too often, people mistake faith for rebellion or use counterculture to shield or to reject anyone else who doesn't believe what they believe. And that's just another form of outsourcing by defining yourself against others instead of defining yourself within the divine. True radical faith does not demand you to conform. It doesn't demand you to reject. It calls you to rise above the pendulum of division. So when you cut people off or you condemn them because they don't share your beliefs, we are not walking in divine love. We're fueling the very shadow that we claim to oppose. Faith is not about exclusion. It's about expansion. It's about seeing the divine spark in those who disagree with us and refusing to mirror the hate with hate. Radical faith means standing sovereign, rooted in love, no matter what storm swirls on around you. And this last thing, the new radical faith isn't about choosing between having to be a Christian or having to sit in ceremony or being, a choice between the Bible and scripture or mushrooms or traditions or freedom or even between different religions, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, or other sacred paths. It's about refusing to settle for secondhand spirituality. It's about the freedom of choice in what it is that brings you faith. So whether you read radical or you listened to Charlie Kirk or you pray in a mosque or you meditate in a temple or you chant in a synagogue or you sit in sacred circle or alone, the question is the same. Will you stop outsourcing your own faith and reclaim your sovereign soul? Because faith in the divine does not require you to be what somebody else expects you to be. It does not require you to belong to a single religion. It does not require you to ascribe to somebody else's belief system. It requires you to be awake and surrender. It requires courage and a willingness to commune with the divine. And it's the radical return to truth, to spirit, and to yourself. So I want to thank you for listening today. This episode is a pivot, a turning point for me, if you will, in standing in my sovereignty and the truth and my divine voice and in my communion with the divine. And if this episode stirred something in you, share it with a friend who's hungry for a different point of view, for truth. If you want to learn more about our sacred ceremonies and teachings, head to the show notes. We have links there for you to find out more if you're curious. And until next time, may you walk in sovereignty, may you walk in truth, and may you never again outsource your faith. So I'll sign out with saying you must have peace in order to have peace out. Until next time.